Hi guys, I'll be honest with you all. I'm addressing today's video with a little bit less of a sunny disposition than I normally would like to. You might be asking why, and it's because over the past 48 hours, I've been hit with about 4 different footballing bombshells that have rocked me and my club, Manchester United, to the core, because I've seen our arch rivals, Manchester City and Liverpool, compile the likes of Tajani Reinders, Ryan Aitnori, Ryan Cherki, and the one that hurts me and hits me the hardest, Wirtz. So today I quickly wanted to give you all just a little bit of recap of the signings that either of these clubs made and kind of what these players can make, as both teams will be vying inevitably for the Premier League next season. So firstly, I want to talk about the Johnny Reinders. Reinders, Aitnori, and Cherki obviously all signed for Manchester City, and I think Reinders is probably the one that's maybe a little bit hardest to profile. And before I kind of get into it today, I do want to say I'm not a massive tactico. I don't know ultimately that much about the sport, but I do think I know enough to work my way around a number of conversations, and I think I can try my best to present to you some certain characteristics that these players all possess and how they can affect these teams. But don't look at me as some type of scout or some type of coach, because I'm anything but that. But I do think I somewhat know my way around the game. But first of all, to start with Reinders, a 26-year-old midfielder coming from AC Milan to Man City. I looked at a little bit of his tape. One of the things I saw that I was kind of blown away with, I didn't really know he had this in him, was an exceptional passing range, kind of diagonals and kind of passes down the middle towards a number 9. I also saw in a number of clips an ability to kind of launch counterattacks. And when I looked at Liverpool, last season's league winners, what made them so great last year was they kind of had about 3 or 4 different styles of play that they did really well kind of throughout a game. Probably their most effective being an almost counterattacking out of nowhere style. Even if they're going against teams of much less quality than them, they'd be able to quickly adjust and quickly expose them through the counter, and it led to a lot of high-scoring games for Liverpool and led to the maximization of some of their best players like Mohamed Salah. And I'm looking at Reinders, and like I said, he has a very good ability to pick up his head and to make that counter-attacking pass, to kind of move it from the midfield to the attack with ease. And what I mean by that is that when I'm looking at Erling Haaland, I think probably the biggest complaint from Manchester City fans hasn't actually been towards Haaland, but who's passing him the final ball. Because Erling Haaland, it looks like, will make a number of countless runs for City, kind of splitting in between 2 opposing center backs, or splitting in between the back line of whoever he's going up against. But oftentimes, that pass to meet him is never there. And something I saw a lot of was Reinders kind of being able to make that pass. And unless it's Kevin De Bruyne making that pass, and De Bruyne's now obviously departing the club, I did struggle to find someone who can, like I said, make that line splitting pass to a darting Haaland who would do it 10, 15 times a game. But I think Reinders can pick up that role in specific pretty well. And a stat site that I like to use, Football Reference, they do a good job of comparing certain players. And the top comparison for Reinders is Manchester City stalwart Ilkay Gundogan. And 10th on that list was Bernardo Silva. And that scares me, because Gundogan, obviously a second stint with Manchester City hasn't gone to plan, but his first 6-7 years with the club were absolutely fantastic, especially during the COVID times. He was someone who was almost inevitable in almost every single game, and as his career wore on, he sat better in this kind of deeper 8 playmaker kind of role, being able to play those passes to whoever was playing as a number 9 for City. And I do think there are some really good comparing metrics between Reinders and Gundogan. So I'll be honest with you all, that does scare me. Kind of moving on from Reinders onto fullback Ryan Aitnori. And when I mean fullback, every time I should pair Aitnori and fullback, I should put fullback in air quotes, because Aitnori is anything but a kind of a defensive-minded player. He almost will play as a second winger. When you look at him, through clips, you see a lot of times he's almost running in the midfield or running alongside a winger, or in Wolverhampton's case, his former club, a left number 10 or a right number 10. And I think this kind of signs something about where Manchester City are headed, because for a number of years, Pep Guardiola has done a bunch of different things with his fullbacks. Most recently, it's been kind of inverting them into almost a defensive mid kind of roles. But one of the first things that made Pep so dangerous at Man City was how quickly he turned Kyle Walker, a defensive-minded fullback, into someone who bombards consistently down the field and makes these overlapping runs to open up space. And I recall seeing a number of goals kind of in the 22-23 season, or a little bit beforehand, where they're just started by something simple, which is just a fullback making that overlapping run and kind of taking the place of an extra defender to open up space for whoever is on the ball, the winger, to make an inside dart or something like that, just to give him more space to work with. And I think Aït-Nouri can do a fantastic job of making those overlapping runs, or even underlapping, getting in front of the winger, a number of times throughout the 90 minutes. Well, I do hold question marks about his defensive abilities. Stats will tell you he's a decent defender, but personally, I have my question marks on him. Just kind of when I watch, I do think he's able to easily get at. And kind of when you're a defender, you can't really make those mistakes that I see him making a lot, or at least a decent amount. So I do think there are certainly flaws in this game defensively. I do think he's still raw a little bit on the offensive end. I think the promise is there. And like I said, I think it's a clear indicator that Guardiola is looking for a lot more of these overlapping runs or underlapping runs with his fullbacks now. I think Aït-Nouri can do a fantastic job of that. And I don't know if I mentioned this, but he's only 24 years old, so there's still a lot of room for him to improve. And the last Manchester City signing I'm going to cover in this video is Cherki. Now, for those of you who don't know, and you should, Cherki is a dynamic winger, kind of attacking mid. He played, obviously, at Olympique Lyonnais before. If you've never seen his game, he's really effective. And last season alone, he compiled 32 goals and assists in just 40 games. And what impresses me most is, while those stats are actually fantastic, his ability to dribble and to play make kind of with his feet is almost second to none in Europe. He's one of the most effective players of being able to pick up the ball, drive inside, drive towards the wing, and take on players, and be successful while taking on players. And you don't need stats to see that. Just look at highlights. I'll urge you to look at both the legs against Manchester United. There are about 3 or 4 moments where he was just taking on 4 or 5 United players and almost dropping them all to the ground. That kind of playmaking, while it's super rare and super hard to do, he's somebody who can do so. Kind of the best thing about Cherki is the fact that, for one, he's 22 years old or 21 years old, but for two is that he's joining Man City for only about 30 million euros, I believe, which is an absolute bargain in today's market. I mean, we're seeing players with half the talent of him going for upwards of 40, 50, 60 million. So to see Cherki going for 30 at just 21 years old, even if he is a massive flop in today's market, that means absolutely nothing. So he's probably the most dangerous player I've listed thus far. I think he'll make an instant impact. I think he'll be able to adapt to a Pep Guardiola system, because I think Pep will now be looking to change up how he plays. I think over the past couple of years, we've grown to see a little bit more of a stale Manchester City, a lot more kind of lethargic on the ball due to the age of the players that they were starting every game. Now they're shifting to a lot more of a younger team. We saw over the winter windows, they brought in 2 youthful center backs, a young Nico Gonzalez, a young Omar Marmoush over in the attack. And once they get Rodri back, he's still a relatively young player. So I think we're going to see a bit of a shift in how Manchester City plays, maybe a little bit more on the counter, like I mentioned with Reinders, being able to connect with Haaland. So it'll be interesting to see. But I think Cherki will have almost no kind of period where he'll flop. I think he'll immediately make an impact. A low adjustment period. That's what I'm thinking for. A low adjustment period. I think Cherki will make an instant impact. Now this is where things start to hurt, because a couple weeks ago I got an alert from Fabrizio Romano, and he was telling me that all of a sudden Florian Wirtz is linked to Liverpool, and that's likely going to be a done deal within the coming days. And I thought I was dreaming, having a nightmare, as a matter of fact, pinching myself. But then over the next couple of days, those links kind of dropped off the map. There wasn't really much talk about it, and I thought to myself, maybe it was just a dream. Then today, it happened. Florian Wirtz confirmed to Liverpool. Here we go. one of the hardest hitting transfers I've ever seen, because I've been a fan of Florian Wirtz for the past 5, 6 years. Kind of once he broke out of Bayer Leverkusen, even beforehand, I just remember seeing older highlight tapes of him, and he's kind of my type of player. If you like to know what type of players I like, think of the Kevin De Bruynes, the Bruno Fernandes, players who can just pick his head up and make the most absurd pass you've ever seen, or create a counterattacks, create attacks at the drop of a hat. And Florian Wirtz fits that profile absolutely perfectly. To me, he ticks all the boxes of what makes an elite number 10 and kind of what is a dying position in today's modern game. But who I'm about to compare him to, and Kevin De Bruyne, I've almost never done before, but I do think the closest thing we'll see to a Kevin De Bruyne is a Florian Wirtz. Some of his stats last year in 45 games, he compiled 30 goals and assists. The year before that, in 49 games, 37 goals and assists. 2 years before that, 24 and 31, 24 goals and assists in 31 matches. But don't just be fooled by the stats. If you guys haven't watched him play, I urge you to do so right now. He does it all. He can dribble super well. He has a fantastic eye for a pass. He scores a lot of great goals. I think the number one thing that just impresses me the most about Wirtz is the fact that he just is so mentally mature for only being 22 years old. And I think it's something worth stating in the fact that Liverpool have spent $150 million on him, because Liverpool are a club that have kind of recently been known to be a little bit stingy with their money. This is a club that took Virgil van Dijk and Mohamed Salah almost to their final months of their contract before opting to renew. When they go and they splash $150 million on a player like this, when they will do that to, I guarantee you, almost nobody else on earth, it should mean a lot. So I urge you to go and look at Florian Wirtz and to kind of see the monster that's coming to the Premier League. Well, one of the things that maybe does scare me, if there's any red flags about Wirtz, is kind of his injury history. He tore his ACL a few years ago, and there are kind of certain studies that lead to believing that there's an increased chance of injuring either your same ACL or the opposite ACL if you get an ACL tear before the age of 25. But ultimately, obviously, the Liverpool team would have done research on that, and they would have gauged that he's worth the $150 million. So, in all honesty, I'm looking for reasons for this transfer to fail, because as much as I love him, he's now playing for my least favorite team in the world. So I need to try and grab onto a little bit hope of that maybe he won't be successful, but in all likelihood he will. And honestly, in all likelihood, I hope he does succeed, because he will be one of the world's best number 10s. If he plays to even half of what he's capable of, and he's been able to do so well, at the age of just 22 years old for the past 3 or 4 years. So he will be a massive player for Liverpool. I think he'll take up this number 10 role and kind of replacing Dominic Szoboszlai, because while I think Szoboszlai is super good kind of off the ball and he has a high work rate, I do question his ability on the ball. His ability kind of drops off. He has a great long-range shot on him, but his final incisive pass, his final playmaking, to me, lacks. And I think Wirtz will pick that up, easily. It'll be seamless, and it'll be improved almost tenfold. So I'm very scared to watch Liverpool next year. But kind of getting away from City and Liverpool, the last team I want to talk about here was Arsenal, because I would be scared if I'm an Arsenal fan right now, simply because Arsenal over the past 3 years now have finished second. And the worst part about that is they've lacked in making the signings that matter the most. And that seems a little bit harsh. And you might be saying, well, they went and they signed Declan Rice, and who was kind of a best-in-class player. And I'll agree, when they signed Declan Rice prior to the 23-24 season, he was a best-in-class player. But when you're looking at the attacking options at Arsenal, while they're fantastic in the likes of Bukayo Saka, and their number 9, Kai Havertz, is a decent player. The left wing, Gabriel Martinelli, can certainly be improved upon. But I'm looking at Bukayo Saka. I'm looking at their, proverbial attacking midfielder in Martin Odegaard. And while I do respect a lot of qualities of their game, Saka more than Odegaard, my biggest problem is what happens when they get injured. Because we look at last season, Saka, Kai Havertz, their number 9, Odegaard, and debatably their best center back, Gabriel, all suffered extensive injuries kind of throughout the season. And a lot of people kind of pinned that down to luck. But I'm asking myself, if they would have replenished with depth in the seasons before, how much would the drop off have been? When you're playing at such an A+ level, if you don't have the proper depth, if one or two of those guys gets injured, that drops to a B, to a C level, and that's kind of what happened to Arsenal. It's unfortunate that it happened at almost 4 different points in the year. So the second they would kind of pick up momentum, another player would go down, and it would kind of drop back down. But in all likelihood, if you continue to play these players 50, 60, 70 games a year, including international games, which is where Odegaard got injured, it will hurt them, and they'll be injured more often than you'd like. So while I do think they're looking to sign Benjamin Sesko, a 22-year-old striker currently at Leipzig, who is a good player, for one, I don't think he's the finished project. He feels like another a project signing. In 3 or 4 years, he'll be one of the best strikers, but for right now, he's not. And I'm looking at this Mikel Arteta, and he's on 3 consecutive seasons placing second. Twice they've led the league for large parts of the year. This season was kind of their big chance to take over Man City, seeing as Man City had such a terrible year. And, they floundered almost probably from January on. We all knew Liverpool were going to win the league last year. So to see Arsenal not really put up much of a fight, and to see their first signing, which hasn't even been confirmed, being Benjamin Sesko, it upsets me as a fan of the sport, and it upsets me as a fan of someone who wants to not see Liverpool or City win the league. I do think it's something worth noting. I also think it's worth noting the fact that they've been linked to Sesko over the past months, years even. I think probably a little bit over a year, because I remember United were once in the fight, but it was always kind of looking like Sesko was going to eventually choose Arsenal, but that felt like a year ago at this point. And so we're seeing, even if you just take it the past couple of months, within the past 48 hours, we've seen 4 massive signings be made, but we're still looking at the same striker for Arsenal under Sesko. So I do think there are massive question marks, kind of how their transfer policy is being ran right now, and kind of who's in charge of that. But that's all for today's video, guys. I'm scared. In all honesty, as a United fan, I am scared, but, we'll hope for the best. But thank you all so much for all the support I've been getting recently. Please like, share, subscribe, and stay safe out there, guys. God bless.